The shrill hum of the electric razor echoed in the cramped locker room of the police station, breaking the heavy silence. Rick Mallon, an officer with a crooked smile and cold gaze, stood towering over a man sitting handcuffed to a chair. The man, a black man in a crisp suit, had his head tilted slightly, his dark eyes burning with suppressed anger. But he doesn't say anything. He refused to grant Mallon the satisfaction of a reaction. "You think you're better than me, huh?" Mallon sneered, bringing the razor closer to the man's tight curls. "Not anymore. Not after that." The policeman seemed to take sadistic pleasure in humiliating his target. But what he didn't know, or chose to ignore, was that this man was not a simple citizen. It was Judge Malcolm Rodd, one of the most respected judges in the state. A few minutes later, the roles would be reversed in spectacular fashion, but before that, we had to go back to the origins of this confrontation. That morning, Malcolm had spoken at a community event in downtown Atlanta intended to strengthen ties between police and Black communities. Under a bright sun, surrounded by a diverse and enthusiastic crowd, he pleaded for a profound reform of the system, emphasizing the importance of justice, fairness, and mutual respect. His clear, firm voice resonated, captivating every ear present. No citizen, regardless of color or origin, should be afraid of law enforcement. We have to be better. His words were a heartfelt call for unity and understanding, a cry for a future where racial divisions would finally be overcome. The speech, deeply honest and passionate, was warmly applauded, and many participants came forward to shake his hand. Young people, parents, elders, all seemed to recognize in him a voice for their struggle and a symbol of hope. Malcolm, dressed in a crisp navy suit, exuded natural authority and commanded respect. His penetrating gaze and erect posture betrayed years of experience in the battle for justice. As he stepped off the stage, he saw smiles and warm handshakes, faces of recognition that made him feel as if his words had found a sincere echo in the hearts of those who had listened to him. He walked away from the stage, a slight smile on his lips, optimistic about the impact of his speech. It was a moment of personal victory, but he knew the real battle was still ahead of him. The road to real, profound change would be strewn with pitfalls, but he felt ready to face it. However, the hope he felt was abruptly cut short when he saw a police car parked near his vehicle, its lights flashing. The contrast with the warm atmosphere of the gathering was striking. Adrenaline instantly surged through him, and a familiar feeling of unease crept into his mind. He knew injustice too well, and he mentally prepared himself for an interaction that could, like so many others, be misinterpreted or turned against him. Malcolm calmly approached the driver, thinking it was a misunderstanding. The crowd, still present in the corner of his gaze, continued to discuss and move around him, but he could not ignore the tension that settled in the air. He walked towards the car window, trying to maintain his calm, confident that this incident could be resolved quickly. Officer Rick Mallon, visibly annoyed at being assigned to this event he despised, rolled down his window slowly, letting out an exasperated sigh. He gave Malcolm a disdainful look, as if annoyed by his mere presence. "You are parked in a prohibited area," he stated sharply, without even looking at where he was, as if his statement was enough to justify his position. Malcolm, surprised but remaining courteous, replied in a calm and measured voice. "I have permission from the organizers. This area has been specially reserved for speakers." He knew his words were justified, but he already felt a growing nervousness in the air around him. It wasn't the first time he found himself in a situation where his authority or status was questioned, but the pain of injustice always lingered, each time, like a blow that left an invisible mark. Mallon, however, didn't seem convinced. He narrowed his eyes, his tone becoming more threatening, almost provocative. "I don't see a permit displayed. Walk away from the car." The agitation of passers-by, who had stopped to observe the scene, was palpable. The phones were already going up, capturing the incident in progress. The tension was now palpable, and Malcolm could feel the eyes fixed on him, on what was going to play out before their eyes. He took a deep breath, trying to remain calm as the situation quickly escalated. "Mr. Agent, I'm sure if you check with the organizers," he tried again, but he didn't have time to finish his sentence. Mallon, visibly irritated by Malcolm's calm attitude, had no use for his explanations. In a brutal and unexpected move, he firmly grabbed Malcolm's arm and, without warning, ejected him from his car, pushing him out of the space he was in. The impact, although not violent, was humiliating and destabilizing. The crowd, until then silent, burst into murmurs of indignation. Voices rose into the hot day air, some trying to understand what was happening, others trying to object to the officer's obvious authority. Malcolm, stunned by the speed of the attack, tried to regain his balance. The gaze of passers-by suddenly changed from admiration to confusion. The murmurs spread like wildfire, everyone trying to understand why a man of his stature was being treated in this public and violent manner. Mallon showed no signs of regret. Instead, he turned towards him haughtily, his cold, authoritative voice echoing in the growing silence around them. "You are under arrest." The handcuffs then rattled, sounding like a hammer blow, striking Malcolm's dignity in front of the crowd of witnesses. The officer's every movement seemed imbued with contempt, a sign of his unquestioned power. The looks became more insistent, the cameras flashed, but Malcolm, although he felt the humiliation sweeping over him, did not let anything show. This moment, he knew, might be the one that defined the next phase of his struggle. At the police station, the situation took an even darker turn. Malcolm, still handcuffed, had barely had time to recover from the public humiliation of his arrest when Agent Mallon, without worrying about the slightest decency, dragged him into the police station. Ignoring the protests of several of his colleagues who tried to intervene and calm the situation, Mallon continued his gesture with disconcerting coldness. He forced Malcolm to sit on a metal chair, the coldness of the metal against his skin doing nothing to ease the humiliation he felt. The sound of keys and chains echoed through the room, but it was the metallic sound of the electric razor that Malcolm heard next, as a foreshadowing of the humiliation he was about to experience. Mallon, with a cruel smile spread across her face, brandished the object like a weapon, her gaze filled with contempt. "It's time to change your look," he said in an almost mocking tone, his voice betraying an intention to make this act a form of personal revenge, a way of making Malcolm pay for his audacity and its position. Malcolm, although he felt intense rage boiling within him, remained impassive. His gaze rested for a moment on the security cameras in the corner of the room, recording every movement, every gesture. He knew that, despite everything he endured, these images would be irrefutable proof of what was happening. That didn't stop him from feeling the rage of the situation working its way into his bones. Every stroke of the razor, every crude movement of the knife across his skin was a deliberate attempt to dehumanize him, to reduce his identity to a mere victim in the hands of an evil man. But Malcolm knew that everything they did was making him stronger. This was going to backfire on them. The noises of the razor, sharpening his indignation, mixed with the sounds of murmurs of incomprehension from the police officers present. Some were clearly uncomfortable, others watched silently, as if unable to intervene. Malcolm knew he had to stay calm, that this moment of brutality might be the last step before this abuse ended. As Mallon, all smiles, stepped back to admire his work, the locker room door suddenly opened with a crash, cutting the heavy silence of the room. The head of the police station, Arlen, entered, his face red with anger, his features marked with indignation. He stopped short when he saw the scene before him. Judge Malcolm Rod handcuffed, sitting in a chair, and Mallon, an electric razor in hand, wearing a sadistic smile. "What's going on here?" Arlen thundered, fury palpable in his voice, rage gripping every word he spoke. The scene he discovered revolted him. One of his officers, his own subordinate, treated a man with such contempt and cruelty. Arlen's gaze fell on Malcolm, then on Mallon. The first words he spoke were cold and full of threats. "Mallon, you're finished." These words echoed in the room like a clap of thunder. Mallon, who apparently believed he had control of the situation, tried to protest, but Arlen interrupted in a firm voice, without the slightest hesitation. "But boss," Malin tried to protest, his face now marked with shame and anger. But Arlen was not willing to listen to his excuses or justifications. "Handcuff him," Arlen ordered in an imperative tone, his anger evident in every syllable. His officers, at first frozen in incomprehension, quickly moved forward and obeyed, their determination palpable. The handcuffs rattled again, but this time they were placed on Malin's wrists, turning him into the victim of his own madness. He stood there, red with shame and anger, as two officers led him out of the room, ignoring his protests and his angry look. The scene had taken a drastic turn, and Malcolm, although still shocked by what he had just suffered, felt, in a strange way, relieved. Justice, even if it came too late, ended up hitting those who had abused it. And in this police station, the injustice he had suffered had just turned against those who thought they could humiliate and demean a man of his stature with impunity. Freed from his handcuffs, Malcolm took a deep breath, feeling the tension leave his shoulders a little. His body was still marked by the humiliation of the arrest, but his mind was already turned toward justice. He knew that what he had just experienced was not an isolated incident, but a reflection of a much larger and more insidious system. It was not just his dignity that had been violated. They were entire lives, communities, years of accumulated suffering. And he was determined to make them heard. He lifted his phone and dialed the number of his wife, Cassandra, who answered almost immediately, as if waiting for his call with palpable worry in her voice. "Malcolm, is this true? I'm told you were arrested?" Her voice shook slightly, a strange combination of panic and relief, as if she knew he was in a dangerous situation, but still hoped he would escape unscathed. "It's okay now," he replied calmly, but his voice betrayed a fierce determination. "But I need you to contact our lawyer. We will file a complaint, and this matter must be made public." He knew that the situation went far beyond his personal case. It was not a simple injustice he had suffered. It was a symptom of a much deeper evil, that of a society where those meant to protect and serve abuse their power without fear of reprisal. Cassandra, always ready to support him in his battles, did not ask unnecessary questions. She immediately understood the seriousness of the situation. "I'll take care of it right away," she said firmly. "You can count on me." Malcolm hung up and then turned to Chief Arlen, who had remained silent until now, observing the scene with an ambivalent expression. Malcolm, his eyes filled with suppressed anger, felt obliged to say his words with unmistakable clarity. "Chief, it's not just Malin that's the problem. This is a system that allows this kind of abuse. It is much larger than this agent. It is an entire system that tolerates impunity, which turns a blind eye to police violence. I will make sure that changes." Her voice, calm but firm, carried a weight of responsibility that he could not ignore. This affair would not be just a coup, an isolated incident that we would forget after a few days. He would transform this humiliation into a cry for justice, a cry for those who had no voice, for those who found themselves crushed by a corrupt system. Arlen looked at him for a long time, a mixture of regret and recognition in his eyes. He knew that Malcolm, as a judge, was a man of principle, a man who would not give in. There had always been whispers in the precinct, whispers that Chief Arlen was fairer than some of his subordinates, but this situation, this public humiliation, was going to push him into making a decision he wouldn't have otherwise dared before. "I will support you, Judge Rod. This police station needs to clean up." His voice was firm, almost solemn. Arlen stood there, in the shadow of his responsibilities, ready to stand up for the truth, even if it meant opposing some of his own officers. He knew it was not an easy path to follow. But, on the other hand, he knew that it was the only path worthy of the name. Malcolm nodded, acknowledging the support. He never had any doubt that the truth would ultimately triumph, but he also knew that this fight would be long, difficult, and fraught with pitfalls. However, he had no intention of backing down. Not now. Not after what he had just experienced. The scene in that police station marked a turning point, not only in his own life, but in the fight against abuse of power. The system was broken, and he was going to put all his energy into exposing it. A few days later, a press conference was held at a local press center, a room packed with reporters, cameras, and microphones, all trained on Malcolm. He, still marked by the humiliation he had suffered, was preparing to speak in front of the whole world. The physical wounds had barely healed, but what hurt him most was the way he had been treated by those who were supposed to uphold justice. He knew that his voice, now heard, could transform this suffering into a powerful message. When he took the stage, a wave of silence spread among the audience. Malcolm, despite the pain and anger still bubbling within him, stood tall, shoulders broad, ready to face the truth. He looked at the cameras and the journalists who were watching him attentively. "A few days ago, I was the victim of a blatant injustice, an injustice that many of us experience, but few have the courage to denounce. I am not a man of agitation, but I am a man of principles. And what I experienced that day, what I suffered, should never have happened." His voice, calm and collected, echoed through the room, and each word was a direct call to action. He publicly recounted his experience, the brutal arrest, the humiliation, and the moment he understood that it was not just a personal attack, but a symptom of a system that allows certain individuals to abuse their power without consequence. He strongly called for urgent reform of police practices, emphasizing the need to restore trust between law enforcement and the communities they are supposed to protect. The images of his arrest had, of course, made the rounds on social networks, igniting the anger and indignation of a public already tired of abuse of power and police violence. The video, showing Malcolm handcuffed and humiliated, sparked a wave of popular support. Hundreds of thousands of shares, comments, and messages of solidarity followed. Outrage became a collective force. Protests were organized across the country, demanding justice for Malcolm and sweeping reforms to the police system. The signs that were brandished in the streets included clear slogans: "Justice Poor Malcolm Rod" and "Police Reform Now." The voices of the demonstrators, united in the same struggle, resonated louder than ever. As for Rick Mallon, the officer responsible for the arrest, he was immediately suspended and then fired from the police force. But it didn't stop there. The authorities, under pressure from the public and the media, decided to go further. Mallon was prosecuted for abuse of power and mistreatment. His brutal attitude towards Malcolm, his obvious disregard for the law and human rights, was now exposed. His name, once linked to authority and respect, became synonymous with abuse and corruption. This was a strong sign that even those in power must be held accountable. For Malcolm, the arrest was not an end point, but rather a starting point. He became a key figure in the fight for justice and equity, transforming his humiliation into a powerful weapon to denounce a broken system. Through his speeches, his interviews, and his political engagement, he continued to make his voice heard, not only for himself, but for all victims of similar abuse. He wasn't just calling for change, he embodied a movement, a collective awareness that was being built around him. And so, what began as an act of hatred and contempt, an attempt at dehumanization and intimidation, transformed into a moment of justice and change. What was supposed to defeat him, annihilate him, only strengthened his determination and galvanized those who, like him, believed in a future where justice would finally be accessible to all, regardless of their skin color or social status.